Welcome to another episode of Podium Stories. Today we have a very special guest in the building. I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation. His name is Ian Jackson. He's the CEO of Enshored, an Inc. 5000 outsourcing firm purpose-built to solve the challenges related to scaling disruptive, high-growth businesses and delivering proven results by employing a unique agile operating framework and the most highly skilled associates in the industry. They help, I believe, over 70 startups, scale-ups, and mid-market companies with outsourced support across customer service, back office, content moderation, sales enablement. Yeah, thank you so much for being here, man.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. So I want to start with a quick question on so I understand that you had a big and long career in the fintech industry. So I want to ask about that step where you pulled the trigger and decided to start an outsourcing company and how that came about.
Yeah, great question. So the first 20 years of my career were really spent working in fintech, and I worked initially from Edinburgh, where I'm from. Moved to London after my MBA. I was managing global businesses at that time for a company called Dealogic, having worked with Thomson Reuters and other companies. And my wife and I, she's from Southern California, we talked about where we wanted to raise a family, and it was clear we didn't want to do it in London where we didn't have any support network, and the choice was going back to Scotland where it's cold and small, or moving to Southern California where it seemed there were better opportunities. Yeah. So that's one part of the story, and then the next part was that the two of us quit our jobs. We spent a month living in France, just over the border from you, actually, for a month while our stuff came out here on a ship. Yeah. And we tried to work out where we were going to live and what we were going to do. And I thought I would continue in fintech. And in 2012, there were only eight or so realistic fintech companies that I could find in Southern and even Northern California, where I thought there might be a fit. And when you get to a certain level, it becomes hard to find a job. And after 6 months, 9 months, 12 months of speaking to these guys, I thought, oh, well, something's got to give here. So I started looking elsewhere. And I got a chance to work with another outsourcing company for 9 months, a company called Taskas. And they brought me in to help them because they were growing really, really quickly. And it became very apparent to me early on that they were really onto something in terms of operating an outsourcing company, which traditionally are kind of boring and aimed at, servicing, banks, insurance companies, healthcare providers, cell phone companies, things like that. Large, slow-moving teams, very bureaucratic, and even the language of it, even for me after 8 years, just still I find it difficult. But Taskas had worked out that all these hyper-growth new tech companies needed support, and I met my business partner, and the two of us decided that we would give it a go. And so we set up Enshored with the vision that we were going to go off and work with high-growth companies, and that's the beginning of the story for us, really.
I love that. And you guys, correct me if I'm mistaken, but it was self-funded and bootstrap. I run a bootstrap company, an agency. We're small. We have a team of 5 people. And I know the challenges that come with starting a self-funded business versus a venture-backed business. So what were the early days like? What did you have to prioritize to get the ball rolling and get the first clients?
Yeah. So when we decided to start, we capitalized the money with, I don't know, $50,000 or something like that each, something like that, just so we had some money for the initial cost for the few months, and then taking no salary or anything else, and assuming nothing was going to come back until the business was profitable. So my partner Jeff actually stayed on with his employer, and did the whole double shift per day, and that phase went on really from January of 2014 up until about August of 2014. And by that point, we managed to quite quickly sign our first 2 clients, and we got ourselves up and running. And so things started to move from that point.
Right. Uh, I remember reading that over the first years, on the early stages, you guys prioritized thought leadership and content and your network as well. So I kind of wanted to dive in a little bit in both. I think one of the first clients that signed came through a blog of yours, if
Yeah.
that's correct. And thought leadership it's what we do as an agency, with working with other B2B SEOs. So it was very interesting for me to see that was one of the main strategies on the early days. I want to hear why you chose that strategy and why you guys think it worked.
Yeah, I think that having just come out, and that client was in fintech space, and this was a fintech specific blog
Right.
that we identified some areas where we could really see that companies were leaving money on the table. And so Jeff, my partner, and I, he came from third party logistics, and those companies are very labor intensive, and then fintech companies in the back office are super labor intensive.
Yeah.
And both industries have adapted differently to having a global marketplace of labor to choose from. And I think some approaches have worked and some haven't. I think fintech has been very interested in taking out cost because for most data businesses they become ex-growth after a while, and it's really important to make sure that they remain profitable. So that was a lot of what we were writing about in the early days. We're more aimed at slightly more mature businesses who might be more at that kind of that point of looking at that. But actually, the client that came on board was a brand new startup who needed help, and it was perfect.
Right.
It really dovetailed in with my past experience and skill set, and so it was a really good fit.
Yeah, sometimes it happens, especially with early clients. I remember our first client was ideal to what we were looking, right? So it was a perfect fit, and it's great to have a perfect fit on the door from day one.
Yeah, and our other client who signed about the same week, our first client was a good college, was run by a college friend of Jeff, my partner. So again, they were quite demanding, but there was again good communications from the beginning.
That trust between one of them.
And the biggest challenge about starting up any business is that, why should your first client sign with you? You've got no track record, so you're trying to fake it till you make it, and you're trying to find somebody who's going to give you more of a look than they probably should be. And so I think leveraging thought leadership and networking makes a big difference.
I love it. So let's go a little bit into the network side of things. That's something that, as a European entrepreneur trying to do business a lot in the United States, for me that was a challenge, especially in the early days, because I didn't know anybody, literally 0 people. So building that network and keeping and maintaining and growing that network was something that I struggled with until I kind of figured things out. So I wanted to hear a bit more about your tips or your thoughts on how to use your network without really using it, just trying to find opportunities that are win-win for everybody.
Yeah, so my network is or was in 2014 still very much within the global fintech network, and I've got people up to super senior level in that network. And I just moved out to Southern California, and my network here was actually very, very small at the beginning.
Right.
So it was a challenge for me too. And I think part of it is trying to work out from your network. So I spent a ton of time studying the people I knew who were going to be influential enough in my network to be able to intro me to somebody else. So any company I was researching and thinking was a good fit for us to pitch to, I was seeing, is there somebody who can give me some kind of warm introduction in there? So even there, where it was, I had a lot of people in New York who may know somebody who knew somebody who was in some of these companies, and so it was painful at first, but I think now I've got a lot of my LinkedIn people are obviously in the Philippines where our operations are, but I think I probably now have caught up and passed my East Coast contacts with my West Coast contacts, and things start to feel finally now that I'm finally here type thing.
Right, and it makes a big difference for me. This podcast actually is one of the best ways for me to have built my network, because I needed to find a way to get in touch with people. that I wanted to meet. And it was a struggle at the beginning, and it can make the whole difference in your business. And because a lot of our business comes from referrals as well, and I'm guessing it works the same way for you guys.
Yeah, referrals are the biggest challenge in any business in B2B space is finding new clients. I think your sales and marketing strategy is critical, and if you don't have some kind of referrals coming in from satisfied existing clients or ex-clients, it's going to be very, very hard. We did a study just middle of last year when we were kicking off a marketing project, and we discovered that actually 40% of our businesses come directly from client referrals.
Wow.
So that's people who've either directly referred one of their direct connections to us, or they've moved from one company, and when they move to the next company, they give us the same call, and that's the best feeling, I think, from a how are you doing perspective. If somebody wants to come back and do it again, that means you're doing something right.
Exactly. Plus, it's free, right? The customer acquisition cost is zero.
It's not. It kind of is free, but then you've also got to be producing an above-average service all the time. Sure. You can either be very good at selling, or you can actually be very good at what you're supposed to be doing, I think.
For sure. Yeah, I like that. I like that. So I remember reading an article from you, I believe it was in Inc. magazine, called Spending to Save, where you say many entrepreneurs start their business with the goal of conserving cash through doing everything themselves. While not burning cash for no good reason is critical to bootstrapping businesses, it can also lead you to do things you may later regret. So I was wondering if we could a bit expand on that excerpt and see how you overcame mentally the feeling of, I need to save money, but also I need to spend to generate new business and to scale as well.
Yeah. So one of the things that we have not had in the 8 years of our business, or 7 years of our business, is any kind of CFO. So I've been doing that along with my role. So I'm always thinking about the cash, right, and it always makes me nervous. And the goal was never to take external funding. So it becomes challenging to really think about spending. So for us, the big decisions have been around things like taking on office space. So one of the reasons that people outsource is they want to take on a flexible partner who can help them expand rapidly as and when they need to. So we need to have at least enough real estate for the runway that we see in our business. Well, this is pre-COVID, obviously, and that was critical to many of our clients' buying decisions. But you don't want to take on so much space that it's sitting empty for long periods of time. Right. And then actually the bigger cost than the rent is normally fitting out office space. Right. So again, it's like how many desks do I want to buy today? How many computers do I want to buy? And I think if you're going to do it from a bootstrap perspective, you have to look at different ways of approaching this. So banks don't want to lend money to small businesses, or if they do, it's tiny amounts. I mean, it's ridiculous how little my bank is willing to put into our business, even though they can see how well we're doing and how profitable we are. So we started to look at finding partners who are happy for us to do things like lease to buy. So we have we don't buy our computers outright. We spend a little bit more money on them, and we lease them for 24 months and then buy them, and that's a big expense for us. So our cash flow cycle, because we're a people business, is that people sign up. People might be in training for 2 to 4 weeks, and then in production for a month, and then sometimes we don't ever see our first check till about that point in time. So to pay somebody for 2 months and get them set up with desk space and all the other costs associated with launching, a new line of business, means that cash flow can be very lumpy at times like that. So we've tried to do as much as we can.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's going to be hard, which leads me to my following question that I want to ask you. about how challenging it was to build around you a team. I'm guessing in the Philippines as the
Yeah,
outsourced company.
yeah.
So I'm sure that I don't know if you had a network there before or it was start kind of from scratch. But if it was from scratch, I'm guessing it was very, very challenging.
Well, it was mostly from scratch. So I'd been out there with my time with Tascas, and Jeff, our partner, had been out there with UTI. So we knew a few people. Um, um, a lot of the advice we got early on is very consistent with the advice lots of other people who've gone out to the Philippines have been given by lawyers and accountants out there, and it's been completely incorrect and has been designed to funnel your hard-earned money into the pockets of people who are not really that interested in your success.
Right.
And there's it's sadly true that there are a whole number of people in the Philippines, like in many third world countries, who just see somebody from somewhere else in the world and assume that they've got so much money that they can steal from you, that they can lie and take things and so on. And we had a bunch of that, but I think we kept as much control as we could over the finances, paying things ourselves. We have had independent auditors since the beginning that have helped with that. So I think that helped us de-risk things, but really we brought in a few people and quickly, working alongside them, worked out that they were of the right stuff, and from there we built things on. So I think we're just coming up on we've been around for 6.5 years or whatever it is, and our we don't have anybody left from our very first class of employees, but we have somebody from the third class of employees who's now a very successful mid-level manager in the company. And our as we've worked with some of these people now from 6 years to 5 to 4, I get more and more confidence all the time in our operations. And then in 2017, I brought in a former colleague from my fintech days to come out and be our country manager in the Philippines, and that's been a huge help. He's Miguel's super helpful in making sure that we that we're on top of all those type of personnel things.
Right, because I'm guessing you even have to build a hierarchy over there, right, within the internal teams in the Philippines, and getting some people to be middle managers from your employee staff. I'm guessing you kind of build a system there.
Yeah, and then the temptation is to often as you're growing is to only promote from within, because you know what you know with the people you have, and then you've got to take some calculated risks on people externally, and it's getting that blend right. So we've had some people who we know have a ton of runway and potential, but you've got to work out, like, are they really ready, and have you had enough time to spend with them in their current job that you can be confident they can take something new on. And the big challenge for us is that in outsourcing, a new client comes in, often you're having to build a whole new team for them. You want to bring some people from your existing team in, but then it's up to your recruitment team and your HR team and your senior managers to assess cultural fit and skill fit for the new work you're bringing on, and that can be quite a challenge. Yeah, that's been a bit of, I think that's part of what we do really well, is getting that right. But at the beginning, it just can't be that good. You don't have enough data points. You don't know what really matters in recruitment in a new market.
Right. What about in terms of like cultural differences? Was that a challenge at the beginning? Because I'm guessing the working culture in United States, Western Europe is different than in the Philippines.
It is. I think that since I first went out there, it's starting to converge a little bit more, for sure. But some of the practices are very different, and we have to often help our clients to understand some of this stuff. People will be very reluctant to speak up at times, even when they have something to say, because they're not used to having bosses who listen to them. The Philippines hierarchy, and a Filipino-owned business will be much more sort of 1950s hierarchy style, rather than a more modern, organizational structure. So people often think that they're not allowed to speak up, and so we spend a whole bunch of time on trying to encourage people to, jump up levels, say when they see something that's not right, and so on. And we're lucky that language is less of an issue. I would say nearly all Filipinos speak at least a reasonable level of English, and certainly they consume enough, English language media that communication is not as challenging as certainly now as it was when I first went out there.
Yeah, that's interesting because I had a podcast earlier today with the CEO of a company who helps European B2B SaaS companies expand to the United States. And for him, he saw that one of the challenges was English. And then we're talking about countries like Italy, France, Spain, and that one of the challenges that a lot of these companies have is that they have a different language, and their content and their communication with when they expand to America or the UK gets mistaken and misshaped. So it's interesting to see that this is less of a problem.
That stuff is the whole kind of localization of international products. So we have some clients who try and help out with that in different spaces, and it's fascinating because especially Americans often look at Europe and say, well, it's almost the same number of people as here. It's almost as big an economy together, so we can just launch a European business. And there's no such thing as a European business. It's got to be a Spanish business and a French business, and even the EU hasn't, I don't think, really solved for that. There are still different legal systems, and there are maybe some things which are easier, but over the cases it is hard.
Yeah, it was very interesting to talk about that and see reflect that in the Philippines. Last question or two questions before we wrap this up, because I want to be respectful of your time. If there was a business that's considering hiring, maybe not outsourcing a whole system to the Philippines, but maybe hiring a couple of virtual assistants or a couple of individuals from the Philippines, what advice would you give them? Or what are the things that they should keep in mind as they test those waters?
If it's a very small team, I think it's like, if it's one or two people and you're a bootstrap startup, you can either work with people like us who are going to help you manage all that stuff, or if you really think you're going to have the bandwidth, and it can be a lot of bandwidth often, you can still look at things like Upwork, especially if it's a very specific niche skill set where you can test for it. But the problem with working with things like Upwork is it's a marketplace, and the person who's working for you today, somebody might offer them 5 cents an hour more, and they're off, and you'll never see them again. Whereas when you work with an outsourcing company, I think what you get is, that once we've been trained on a process, once we can consistently deliver that training again to whoever else we need to do, and that becomes our problem, not yours. I think people often also over think it and try and find like the 500 things which Filipinos may not be able to do the same way as somebody from some other country. I think it's when you actually break it down, it's not really true. Yes, you're going to hear a different accent. You have a Spanish accent or a Catalonian accent, probably I should, and I have a Scottish accent that's going to be kind of messed up from 15 years being away from home. People understand me fine, and they don't use that as a reason not to do business with me. So I think there's something there about like having a customer service person or somebody with a slightly different accent and who uses different words. If you're a truly global business who believes in globalization, you shouldn't care about that stuff, and you should really be embracing it. Because
100%. Last question, Ian, before I let you go. Really quickly, if you could go back to the time when you were thinking about starting Enshored or starting Enshored, what's the one piece of advice that you would like to give yourself, or that you wish you had known back then?
I don't have so much advice. I was thinking about this, but I would have. I think I should have been a little bit more optimistic. I think that in the first few years, when you're not getting the results, I lost sight of the 20 years of professional success I'd had before, and I was sitting there like with a lot of self-doubt. When you do a startup, I think what happens is that you do a lot of your work, and it almost goes unnoticed, anywhere else, but you've done the work, and sometimes you just got to be patient, and eventually the results will come. And I think that's what happened to us. 2015, 2016, 2017, you know, the business didn't really explode, and it was really as we got into late 2017 into 2018 when finally, you know, I think we got the return for the work we did in 2014, 2015. So patience, and it is difficult, right? Because it's one of two things: either you're being patient or you're being stupid. So that for me, I think I knew that we just needed to be a little bit more patient, and I was, you know, I was just, I was a little bit too pessimistic about that period.
That's interesting, because I relate to that. We're still in the early days, but I relate to that for sure, and it's encouraging to hear. Ian, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. We're going to put the links to your website. We're going to put the links to your LinkedIn as well in case our listeners want to reach out to you. But once again, I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks very much for your time, Marty.
Awesome, man. Take care.
Yeah,
bye.